Hello, everybody. I'm Daniel P. Riley of Whimsyland Literary Coaching and Services, and I am flying solo on this IAK podcast tonight to speak with Marko about his series, Knights of the Autumn Crown. How you doing, Marko?
Fantastic. I ain't gonna say, man, that intro was hard.
Yeah, putting that together was fun. It took me a couple of days. After I asked a couple of guys in our community about getting some music put together for the new IAK intro, and they created that phenomenal score. And then I had to go through and kind of put that together and make it pace with that beautiful music. It turned out fantastic.
Nice.
So thank you. Very much appreciate it. We were trying to put the work in on this show. This is about you, though. So tell us about Knights of the Autumn Crown.
Oh, man. That's a perfect question for you to ask. Well, I got a little bit of stuff that I love in there. I got a lot of the stuff I love in there. It's a lot of Zelda. It's inspired by Samurai Jack. Took a lot of inspiration from Legacy of Kain. It's weird tales, Lovecraft, and just I figured, like, how can I get this into a really, really good, taking the stuff that I really enjoyed and really trying to, like, getting something that I wanted to read and I wanted to share with other folks to read. When I was younger, I was really inspired to write like a almost Lord of the Rings like trilogy, and I took a few creative writing classes, but the stuff I put out was I was a terrible writer. Like, I mean, grammatically terrible writer. I couldn't do any of it, and I'm like, I suck at this, and my characters were like one-dimensional. They were just carbon copies of each other. I'm like, I can't do this. But I was like, man, I need to try something because I have all these ideas in my head. And, you probably have seen Razor Fist on his videos where he was talking about what was it? He came out with that pulp, Night Vale. And he was like, just do it. He was like, just do it. Just do it. I'm like, he's right. I'm just going to do it.
Yep. Happens a lot. I mean, I'm kind of the same. I spent years, almost a decade actually, looking for things that I wanted to get excited about. I was going to the bookstores looking for a new book to read. I was going, running through various streaming services when they started popping up and condensing everything, looking for stuff that I used to love and finding all the new stuff, trying it out, but it all lacks so hard. So I finally, after years of, I'm writing my own stuff for like tabletop RPGs and things like that, writing these stories out. Eventually I went, okay, fine. If nobody's going to, put out the stuff that I like, I'm going to have to do it myself. And I started learning, started actively trying to write novel style storylines instead of tabletop RPG storylines, because there's a big difference between the two. So I totally get it. And then with the big boom of self-publishing becoming available, I went, oh, well, now's the time.
Mm-hmm.
So here we are. But let's dig into a little bit of the story. I mean, you can tell us about who your current cast of characters are. I found that that's really what hooks a lot of readers in, is if they can identify and enjoy the characters in your setting, and then they get to experience the world along their side.
So the story I was going to write originally, I actually had created this list of characters, and they were slightly they were a little different from what you normally read. And but like I said, the problem was they were all like very one-dimensional, and I put it aside for a while, and I came back to all of them and said, what I want is, I don't want to read cliche characters. I want real, genuine people. And I said, I'm going to start from the beginning. And I had to basically kind of like, I kept them, but I kind of changed so much about them. My primary character in the series she's actually the first female character I had ever created. And I've given her the name, you can say it multiple ways. It's I think in Gaelic it's pronounced A's, and this also can be spelled like I's, I's. So technically they're all correct, but I was going with more of the Gaelic A's. So she is the primary character, and she is, she's a human, and she's fallen into this, she's fallen into the world of Fae, and I want to go with the actual Brothers Grimm style Fae, and I wanted her to say, like, here's the world, here is the creature she interacts with, and the first thing she faces off against, she never gets to see it. She can only see what it's doing to the environment around her. And that was the kind of Lovecraftian influence I took, where you never see this thing. You only see what it's doing. And that Jurassic Park where you have the thud and the ripples watering and like the sounds and it's getting closer and like, what is that? And I wanted to write in a way that would really pull you in, and it's like you feel and get into the emotion of what that person is.
Sounds great.
Yeah. And
now A's is from our
yes,
time, correct?
Correct. Little side note. When you were mentioning about excuse me. When you were mentioning about I had actually done a lot of GMing, and I wrote a lot of storylines as well. And the biggest influence I took for this actual setting was the World of Darkness, because it had multiple venues. Now this one obviously it takes a lot of influence from Changeling. And
which version?
If you're gonna shoot me, Changeling the Lost. Okay, I
actually like Changeling the Lost more than I like Changeling the Dreaming.
So my very, very first tabletop game ever was Requiem. My folks were like hyper religious, never wouldn't let me play D&D, but we met up at the high school at night and played Requiem. So it was my first intro I ever had, and I know there's like some controversy between them, and like I like both for different reasons. Anyway, so this particular one does take a lot of influence from Changeling, and so you'll catch some references. So like the title is Into the Hedge. It's the Hedge from Changeling. So when I was designing, I was messing around, and this was kind of how I got what really sparked this off was an argument between me and a player about, well, it was about like commoners, leveling in commoners and like, not commoners specifically, but a class between like, you have 3.5, the wizard, the sorcerer. And I drew an image of like, what if you had the stat wise is a commoner just a wizard with a spell book? And I ended up just kind of like scrolling out this girl holding up this lantern in a swamp. And I'm like, and she was supposed to be a wizard. And I thought, wait a minute, I got an idea. And I knew what I wanted to do. I knew where I wanted to introduce the story. And so that's where I started. And I started like getting inspired, like, oh, and I like the lantern had like a spirit inside of it. And it was kind of like almost like the Legend of Zelda-esque, where you have, I took more influence from Midna than Navi, but
Gotcha.
because I love Midna so much. I love her personality. And it was kind of like that dynamic in Twilight Princess where the two characters is like she's Midna is using Link and he's stuck in the spirit world. He needs her help, and I'm like, oh, now I know what I want to do. So, she here in the first chapter, she's hearing a voice calling out to her, and she's like, "Where are you?" And it's just calling to her, and eventually she gets to it and just sees this lantern hanging there in this old knotted out tree, and it's like, "You need to free me," and she's like, "I don't know, man. Like, is this? I don't know what to do."
You're a talking lamp. Why would I free you?
Yeah, it's like it's like, okay, I'm not from this world, but I'm not an idiot. I know like there's something ain't right. Something ain't stirring the Kool-Aid here. And that was the dynamic of that very you're a mundane character messing with forces she doesn't understand, not out of necessity for her survival, because her ultimate goal is, I need to get back to my own home. I don't know how I got here, and you're the only person who can help me.
Yep. Yeah, it's perfect. And I full disclosure, obviously, I've been working with Marko on these books, and I do like the lamp creature, spirit, whatever you want to call it, quite a bit. It actually reminds me a little bit of, if you're familiar with, I'm gonna horribly butcher the poor company's name, possibly Studio Ghibli's Howl's Moving Castle.
Yeah, I get a lot of people who say like they hear a lot, they make conclusions, and I'm like, yeah, I can see that. Some level, there's always like a subconscious, like a thing I did that I didn't think about at the time. So
yeah, it's just the character, the description of this lamp, and you assume inside of it that the spirit that's talking to her is a flame that's or some sort of light that is shining forth from inside of the lamp. So it just gave me Calcifer vibes.
And so I like how when I was writing it, when I first started putting it up on Royal Road for a little bit, and I really did like how some of the readers were looking at it, and they were paying attention to the things that were going on in each chapter, and they were starting to like pick up on little cues and putting pieces together. And someone's like, they right away they figure out the spirit when she asks him, like, so who are you? And she gets frustrated in the book. She's like, you're not she won't tell me nothing. Why don't you tell me nothing? And he finally sits there and says, you can call me Gloam. And now there's like an actual, there's a bit of a RPG backstory to that. Then I used him because a lot of people really liked this character when I played him originally. I'm probably spoiling a bit, but the two things that a lot of people noticed was that in the first chapter, he calls her A's, and she says, that's not my name. And he keeps insisting that's what it is. And another thing is, like, when she says, well, who are you? He just says, call me Gloam.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very particular thing that if you're some people who are kind of like into Brothers Grimm stories will kind of pick up on the reason why, but little by little in each story, in each book, the first book is like, I do throw a lot of bit out there, but in my later on in the other books, I kind of like I answer some questions that came before in previous books, but then I also impose other questions, and slowly, little at a time, because when you start dealing with elements of like, it's a different world, there's Fae, like that was a thing of I want to introduce just enough to where no one's overwhelmed with what's happening, but just enough to where they're like, I want to know more. And I do get happy when people start to really pay attention, because in each book there is these little cues and these little hints that you'll kind of gloss over them at first, but then sometimes you might look back and go, wait a minute, I there was a reference back here.
Yeah, it's always fun. It's one of the things that I enjoy most of well-written series. So I'm glad that you're adopting that. What's interesting to me about the concept is that it's almost traditional in the fairy tale design of it, but at the same time, she is, for lack of a better way to put it, applying a more modern personality response to these things, where like the old tales were more around the culture of that period of time, so people were a little bit different. The idea behind fairy tales to begin with were warning tales, parables, basically. Hey, if you do these things, bad things are going to happen. And your story is applying this modern character to the same concepts, but the character is reacting to them in very modern fashions. And I like the way that that's working out so far.
Oh yeah, and that was another thing that I was really, that's where the Changeling, the Lost, because what I really like about the World of Darkness universe is it's all these old stories, all these old mythologies, but it's set in the modern world. And it's like, the modern world comes with it being these supernatural creatures in the modern world, kind of comes with its own the own hiccups that you have to deal with, where it's like, this isn't back in the the middle ages, whatever. It's the modern times.
Yep. Absolutely. The that was one of the things that I liked most about Lost versus Dreaming. The concept behind Dreaming, for those that may not know, very quickly, was that the changelings were fairy souls that were existing inside of humans in order to not be snuffed out by everyone's disillusion with the modern world. Like the fact that people generally are not so fantastical or whimsical or inspired these days was destroying the parallel universe that fairies lived in. And with Lost, instead, that parallel universe actually sits on the other side of a almost like labyrinth style place, which is the Hedge, Labyrinth, the film, I mean, where if a person is taken into this realm that exists as a border between fairy and reality, and the laws of everything do not apply there anymore. It's all, Alice in Wonderland style chaos and danger, which really appealed to me as a player, because I'm like, I can craft all sorts of crazy stories out of this concept. It's so open-ended. But doubling back into your Knights of the Autumn Crown series here, one thing I did want to talk about a little bit was your idea and decision to write these books in short formats. What was the rationale behind that? I mean, it's a really cool idea, and I'm trying something similar myself with a superhero series I'm working on. But what was the rationale behind producing these as short books?
So, a major influence was, I'll say this again, was Razor Fist when he was talking about his Night Vale series, and he kept mentioning about pulps. And I had heard the term before, but I wasn't fully familiar with it. And I had actually, a little bit beforehand, I was aware of the Shadow, and I would listen to I started listening to the, what is it? You can pull it up there, like old the Shadow radio show, or like, blue coal and back to the Shadow, and that I really liked that, because a lot of that was just, it's all audio. It's all in your head.
Men. Yes.
Yeah. Right. Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I love that, because it's all in your head. You don't see an image. You're just having someone tell you stuff, and and it's like, anyway. And
radio broadcasts were really cool. I mean, they may have for a short time been the biggest thing available in entertainment, because obviously when radio was first kicking off, that radio dramas were pardon me, were a big part of people's relaxation periods, sitting there in the living room with your family listening to the radio, and then this really cool drama comes on and you get to experience a story in a whole new way. But they kind of dropped off very quickly, because technology at that time was rapidly expanding and things were changing so fast. But if you go back and listen to some of the radio dramas that they did, not just in like the science fiction or fantasy categories or even the noir categories, but even in some of the personal dramas, the voice actors, radio actors, were all people that worked in broadcasting, obviously. So they had that sort of vocal training, but they learned very quickly how to express themselves in voice. And that's really hard to do. We don't even have like a concept of it anymore, because everything is video around us. We see everything. So to close your eyes and listen to these voices, like in audiobooks nowadays, to close your eyes and listen to these voices and then try to imagine for yourself, that's the same experience as what all these people were experiencing back in the beginning of the radio broadcast system. It's just through a different medium now. So it does still exist, and it's really cool. But I like the idea behind doing what you're doing based on the pulp styles. I mean, I'm kind of a bit of a pulp guy, not a huge aficionado or anything, but I do love the Shadow stuff. I mean, Sherlock Holmes, technically a pulp series, which is one of my favorites. I'm a huge Conan Doyle nerd. But there were a ton of them out there, not just with Howard's Conan. There's like the Doc Savage stuff. There were a bunch of sci-fi series run through the Asimov magazines. And so you were modeling this off of them, where these stories are condensed into sequences of scenes instead of like a whole tale.
Kind of like that. So it's still an ambitious like trilogy. Really, it's a really long story, and but it was simpler for me to write it like this, because I actually used to do they had like open mic at the college that I'd go to, and because I wasn't like one of these people who I could tell jokes, but I wasn't like a comedian like the other guys were. But I'd go up there and I'd just make up stories, and a lot of them were they were very dark and mysterious. And I would make up stories about the dumbest crap, and I would make people. I'm serious. I made up a horror story about cotton candy grapes at the store I worked at. and how they turn people into like raving lunatics, because they'll literally call up our store. You got this card, grab the grades, you got it. Like, bro, calm down. And they're like $30 a bag or whatever. And people got like 7 boxes, and you have like 11 bags in a box. Okay, sure, you got money to burn. But I kind of made up this story about like these zombie-like people coming after the cotton candy grapes, and I had like 3 people in my audience who were terrified. So I just, yeah, it was. I said like I kind of write my stories the way as if I'm telling a story. And I figured that works for me. I can't really write in a traditional sense.
I gotcha. And that's the way you need to do it. However, the story needs to be told. And I think there's probably a untapped market for that these days with how short people's attention spans are getting.
Yeah.
To be able to, that was the idea behind my little superhero series that I've been working on, is if people are so busy that their lives are dictated around a 15-minute coffee break, then why not write a story that can be enjoyed in 15 minutes?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I really liked about this Knights of the Autumn Crowns series that you've been working on. They're condensed, but they're actual, even though they're scenes in a greater narrative, they're condensed down into a beginning, middle, and end in a shorter format that's not skimping on any of the good stuff. Like, you're not losing the descriptive qualities, the imaginative prose, or the enjoyable dialogue and action. It's all in there. It's just compacted into a much shorter format than your standard size, say, novella or full novel.
And that is one thing that a lot of people really kind of gave me a good praise on. He says, I love how you'll get like a paragraph and you will get so detailed into it, and then you move on. And it's like this beautiful imagery, move on. And he said, there was people who would write like 5 pages front and back about this, the water moisture dripping off a gargoyle's face or something like that, if I remember correctly. And I'm like, bro, you would lose me at this. It's like, is this going somewhere? Like, yeah, that's okay. That's a lot of intricacies. Does it matter? And that was like, the thing was, for me, it was like, it had to matter. It had to be something in the story that made the story relevant. It's like, what is the point? And that, I think in a lot of ways, that was another decision I made for it to go with the more pulp-ish route, was that I wanted to get to the point. And I again, this is when I mentioned, like, I took some influence from Samurai Jack. What's that word where the main character goes to a different reality?
Isekai.
Yeah, that's it. So it was very much like that, and I said, like, the very first, because I remember the very first Samurai Jack episode, I was so hyped for it, where he fights Aku and then he gets sent back, and then he realizes, like, I'm in the future. And I think it was like, an hour long with commercials and all that. And I said, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make the first book. Like, I'm going to make the first book. I made it like 18,000 words. And then the ones that come after that are going to be like, half that size, like maybe 10,000 at the most. So it was like, you have a full, intro, and then it's just episode. And I was like, I like that, because it's something you can really see. You can follow it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I had sort of the similar process with my G Sedai series when I was formatting and outlining out what I wanted to do with it. My initial concern was, this isn't nearly long enough to be a full novel. And then I went, it doesn't matter. Producing it was really interesting because all of the reviews and responses I get from the focus groups I tap into and whatnot in the book spheres is that it's more enjoyable not to over explain everything. And I'm like, thank you. That's what I've been saying this whole time, because that's what I grew up on. Yeah, I grew up on like the Spellsinger books way back in the 70s. You know, my uncle gave me all of his old fantasy books. So I grew up on Spellsinger and the Chronicles of Amber and all of these that are short, but still sitting on the line of, you know, full novels in a series. And then they were prodigious series. I mean, Chronicles of Amber is like, what, 11 books long. So altogether, it's a chunky story when it's all in one big compendium. But in the original versions, the books were like this big. You could just stuff them in your back pocket and run off with them. That sort of thing I loved about being able to pick up a book and stick it in my back pocket and read it when I had an opportunity to read it. And it sounds like you and I are kind of on the same page, but you've got it condensed down even better than I do. I'll admit that, because I've read both both of the drafts you've given me. You've got this thing locked down even more impressively concise than I do.
That was I hate saying this, but the first book, I did several rewrites, and the first time I had written about, I was working security. I had an app and that I could write my story on and everything, and I got to like 11,000 words. Somehow the app crashed and I lost it all. Fortunately, I had some backup. Yeah, I had some backup stuff though. And I was like, good. So I said like, okay, I'm gonna start over. And how far did I get? I got to maybe chapter 7 in the first rewrite, and I stopped and said, I don't like this because it's so far away from my original idea. So I said, I'm going, and I went back and I looked at the picture I drew and I said, this is what I want, but this is not what I'm presenting. So I just put all that, in a Google Doc, and I said, I'll use this later. Mm-hmm. And I said, I'm rewriting this a third. So that book 1, I hate saying it, I probably spent maybe 4 years writing that. So there was but I did the same thing. I went to like some folks and I read the story to them, and, and over time I got, I started to really narrow my focus in what did I want? What was I looking for? And I really wanted to, I really wanted to get that, that very much that essence of let your mind do all the work and don't overshare. Just tell, this is what is happening. This is what is going on. And if the reader comes up with their own little thing, that's fine. Whatever. It doesn't matter. Just tell them what's happening. It'll work itself out later, and they, and I am very much proud of my second book, because I was able to sit there and go, I wrote it a lot faster and it was more clean. And I could tell that, I started to really find that, whatever you call it, that the way you write was more proficient than the first book.
Yeah, you found your narrative voice. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And don't feel bad about going back to the start repeatedly. I have 4 books in my drive that I've rewritten the beginnings of at least 3 times now each, and they're still not right. So, as a writer, it happens. Sometimes you just can't get the story out the right way, and you just have to wait for that lightning strike to happen, and then you can go.
So this is what I started doing. And this actually was something that slowed me down a lot, because I was very self-conscious about the way I was writing. When I was back in high school, when I started writing, I was very self-conscious because the characters were that standard of you could tell this was like somebody brand new trying to write a story, and you're like, oh, my character's super cool, man, and stuff like that. And I said, like, yeah, but it doesn't feel real. And I'm like, how can I make this feel real? Wait a minute, I've GM'd a game before. It's easy. Make a character sheet, roll the dice, just say, here's my stats, boom, do I succeed or do I fail? And that has actually been something that has really added a stronger depth to, because I'll tell you a secret. Something happens in the very first chapter to the main character, and because I rolled the dice, and because of the way the dice fell, the number, that literally changed the story. That literally changed the direction the story was going. And I'm like, yes, this is how I want to do it, because it's just, it's like, just run it like a game. You play the character like, hey, here's my character. You're the GM. What happens? Okay, this is the situation. What do you do? I do this. Okay, roll the dice, and we'll see if you succeed or fail.
Love it. Adds a level of randomosity.
And here's the thing is, because of that, there's no chance that anyone can sit there and go, oh, but the character, the Mary Sue, because that, no, it's literally, I'm not deciding what's happening. It's literally rolling the dice and saying, well, you failed, sorry.
Yep, let fate decide. I like it. That's a unique way to go about it. I've heard of the coin flip trick. I've heard the if you don't know what to do next, make something happen, advice. But literally approaching it like an RPG sequence and letting dice rolls dictate the terms of the scene is fantastic. Love it.
One of the things that it added a little extra depth was, and you'll notice this, there's a few times in the story, Gloam instructs Eyes, say this. And she says something and an effect happens. So that's basically, he has a list of spells per day. And I think, if I remember correctly, either in this book or in the second one, I think she inquires about it, and he's like, I can't. Well, why not? And, because he's like, well, all my spells are used up. And there's certain, there's certain things that happen. And, the reader might be like, well, why doesn't they did this? Why don't they do it now? It's like, because the spell's out and he's got to rest.
Yep.
And I think they actually have a conversation about that at one point, if I remember correct. Either in this one or the next one, they have a conversation about that.
I believe it's in the second one. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was another thing that I really, really wanted to have, because, when you mentioned about like the modern, a modern character, yeah, she, the character, she is like, crap, I gotta remember, like she's young, she's like 19 years old, so yeah, she's like current year and all that. So, but she does ask a lot of questions, and a lot of these questions, I want them to be questions that either a person who is reading the story would ask, or because there's sometimes I sit there and go, okay, so why is this? And I go, oh, wait, let it go. And I was like, okay. And then the character asked, why does this happen? Or why this? And I want to sit there. So that way it's like, yeah, that's a good question. And, here's the response, or, if he gets a response. And if you've been a little infuriated about why he is vague, there is a reason he is being vague.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
I suspect quite a few things when it comes to Gloam, but yeah, to my mind, being the avid reader that I am, a magician never reveals their tricks, not unless they absolutely have to. So his deflection or vague explanations, they make perfect sense to me.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the other side of the characters before we got to wrap this up here.
Okay.
Your villains, your dangers in the story, they're all very obviously fairy tale in design, but at the same time their motivations seem a bit more realistic, which sort of tracks well with the idea that this is a young woman from our current culture. You would have to assume that even, the Hedge would evolve over time. They wouldn't all be stuck doing the same stuff that they were doing in the old Grimm's tales. I mean, there are certain things that they absolutely have to because it's part of their nature, but the motivation behind the dark side of things in these stories, they have a slightly more evolved notion, in my opinion. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about your outline decisions for that. How did that come up, or how did you design the oppositional characters in the story?
I'm really glad you asked that question, because I always do put something in, and I'm really like, I really hope someone like starts to wonder. But so yeah, it's, when I, believe it or not, like, I'm actually the whole series is, in some ways, I'm actually at the very end, and I'm even working on like what's past this particular series, and taking notes and writing stuff out. But so there is a whole reason as to what's happening. It's not just, there's a whole backstory, there's a lore, there's history, and I made a Discord page just where I can sit there and like actually jot all this stuff out. But to basically, it is a lot of it is based on purely, we're trying to survive, because the reality is they even don't know they understand their environment, but they don't really know everything about it. And all they know what to do is how to get by. So when you mention things like, so I'll just throw this out there because I know you've read book 2. Have I mentioned in the book 1 or book 2 anything related to the word shinies?
I think in book 2 briefly.
So
I don't remember it being in book 1.
So they, metal is almost unseen. It is, if anyone has any sort of metal, it's almost entirely rare, or their current currency is anything that has a reflective surface. Anything.
Okay.
It can be a rock, it can be a polished dog turd, anything. They will find it valuable, and it's exchange it. So it's just shinies. And because of this, it's this environment where it is, I guess post-apocalyptic would kind of fit, but it is that kind of environment where there, you've seen probably in the books, the character has stumbled into a couple of ruins. Exactly that. It's that's the whole reason, is there was a world before this. And what you see is what is remaining. And I think for you, because you have read the second book, you actually, I think you caught a glimpse of something. You caught a glimpse of what had happened at one point.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah. And it's, I mean, time passes for everyone. You have to assume that it would also pass for this alter world just like it does in our time. So it makes perfect sense that they're existing in what may be the aftermath of some greater concern, catastrophe, whatever you might want to call it. And now that you mention that, it actually puts a little bit more of what I've read so far into a greater context, which is surprising. I hadn't considered that. Obviously, I assumed that time had passed, but I wasn't thinking maybe there was something greater, and this is sort of a devolved version of what this alternate reality was originally like. And greater motivations. It's interesting. I'm intrigued to learn the big reveal as far as who's sort of propped up as the current villain ish, the headmistress. I find that interesting.
Yeah. I think there's a part where the headmistress and Gloom have a conversation, and I think you're gonna find it absolutely hilarious. Because it's what you would assume about. It's safe to assume what you would assume about the headmistress, and what she's doing or what's going on, and there is based, a lot of this comes from stuff that I had written before, but I was like, I want to put this somewhere else. So, a lot of these are like using those ideas into this setting or into this thing. And so each, not trying to spoil too much, but there's a few things that do happen throughout the books very briefly that's connected to one of the characters specifically. And it's trying to basically do a little bit of foreshadowing as to what is happening close or in the distant future, and to give you an idea. Because there is a hefty bit of intrigue and kind of like, I don't want to say politics necessarily, but there is a bit of that too. But it's more in the background, kind of like if you're looking at a painting and you see like stuff that adds texture to it, is how I've designed it. It focuses on Eyes herself, but she does end up getting caught up in a lot of things. So,
as isekai characters tend to do. It makes sense. Real briefly here, before we wrap up completely, I want to show everybody. There we go. I'm logged in, so obviously saw my purchase of number one because I wanted to check it out before we started working on everything. But this, obviously, first one's on Amazon. When are you looking at putting number 2 out? Or is it
will be
yet?
I plan to have it done probably by the end of the month.
Okay,
I've got the girl who's doing the cover art. It's ironic. I accidentally met her at the bank when I was paying off I was paying off a loan, and then I saw all her artwork, and then she's like, "Yeah, is there anything else I can do for you?" It's like, "Yeah, who did all that?" "Oh, that was me." Like, so let me tell you about this book, and I need a cover artist.
That is cool.
Yeah, it is cool.
Love how that works, and it is a beautiful cover. I mean, she did a fantastic job. It hits all the right elements. The perspective is exactly right.
Unfortunately, the girl, this is a Polish friend who actually did this cover.
Oh, okay.
And the one who's doing the next one, she's local, and I really like a lot of what she does. Her designs were extremely whimsical and almost otherworldly. When I looked at them, I said, like, that's what I want. That's what I need in my book. So, Yeah, my this girl was named Kasha, and I can't pronounce her last name very well, but she wasn't able to continue doing some artwork, which is up, but yeah, she did this beautiful.
That's a shame. Yeah,
it is.
She's got some talent.
Oh yeah, it was like that cover was like $350, and that was worth every penny.
Beautiful. Are you having your new artist redo this cover?
I
be
don't
like
think
in
so.
line with the rest. Okay.
I thought about that, and I'm like, I really like this one too much, and I kind of want to. I may at some point, but I think like I want to keep this one just because I like what it looks like.
Yeah, it's really cool. I had worked with an artist for my first G-Side book because I really liked the almost stained glass design of her drawings, and so I had her do this, and then it took me a little over a year to get the second book done. So I went back to her and I said, okay, let's do the second cover. So she sends me the second cover, and her art style just evolved between the two books. So I went, I'm gonna have to pay her for a whole new book one cover, because to see book one in this more evolved version would just be amazing, and it was. So that's why I was curious. It was just like thematically to me, I was like, okay, I love your style, but the second cover is better. Make the first cover like that one.
I do hate to say this, because when I did have a few years ago, I did have Kasha working on the cover for book 2, and I gave her a lot of influence and ideas. And what she presented to me, I was like, oh no, I could. It's like it wasn't bad, but it had all the wrong messages, because it was like, okay, you're supposed to be running from this giant wolf creature in a dark forest. So she basically had the main character like in her, her clothes being torn, her back against the wall, and then there was this creature that was like on its hind legs coming close. I'm like, Kasha, this sends a lot of wrong messages. And she was like, yeah, I know, but it's like, isn't this what you want? Like, not really. Yes, but no.
Yeah, that sort of cover belongs on a certain other genre of books. Totally get it. Excuse me. Oof. Long day, too much talking.
Right.
So, well, thank you for sitting down with me and talking about these stories, Knights of the Autumn Crown series. Where can people, subscribe and find you to keep updates about how the series?
So I've got a Substack. I've basically moved all my stuff over there, and I'm working on actually a lot more stuff. While I work out the other books, I've got stuff that actually is, a lot of this pulls from the World of Darkness. I've got a pulp that it's inspired by The Shadow. It's basically Detective Nosferatu out for revenge. I have a kind of like Hunter style pulp. The first one was known as The Inquisition of Alejandro. So it's set during the Spanish Inquisition. That was actually inspired by Solomon Kane. And let's see what else. One of my recent ones, it is it's simply called The Goth. It's a historical fiction inspired by Conan the Barbarian about when the Goths moved to Europe and became, they became like the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths, and I had read that one out there. I'm like, bro, this is intense. This is really dark and messed up. I'm like, it's supposed to be.
Yeah, kind of has to be.
Now the last one, A lot of people were really psyched about this one, but I gotta really put it down. I haven't written this one yet, but it's inspired by Werewolf the Apocalypse. Basically, so you know about the Black Furies, right?
Yes.
Okay. So here's a question: what do we do with where do our brothers go? And the response was they go to Athos.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, Greek Orthodox werewolf warrior monks.
Love it.
A lot of that I took a lot of influence from Warhammer, so it's very Warhammer-ish.
Okay, I'm digging it so far. Now you got me curious.
Yeah,
that's gonna be sweet.
Oh yeah, I gave a little small draft to a guy that there's a little coffee shop or coffee bar I go to, and I sat there and I told this guy, like, I gave him a description of like my because I got 5 characters and each one of them represents an auspice, and he's like, dude, these guys sound amazing.
Right on. So you're doing the oh gosh, it's one of the obscure terms, and now I can't think of it. There was actually a term for a pack of Geru that the members represented each auspice.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember the name of it now, but that's cool.
Yeah.
That always reminded me of the concept of like the old Super Sentai, Power Ranger style.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually ran a couple of games where our players played the individual auspices so we could run that sort of sequence, but the word escapes me, so I'm gonna give up trying to remember it and just talk myself out here. Marko, thanks for sitting down with me and talking about this awesome series. I hope everybody goes and checks it out. I am Daniel P. Riley of Whimsyland Literary Coaching and Services, host of the IAK podcast, alongside Justin and Andrew, who couldn't be with us this evening, obviously. And if you like what we do, you're interested in the story, I think you should go check out Into the Hedge, pick it up on Amazon, and subscribe to IAK for more really intense and interesting creators like Marko. We interview new people every month, and sometimes twice a month if we get an opportunity to. And as usual, I will just say this: go be great.